Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week we're doing things a little differently, as it's going to be a Power Rankings episode in which a guest joins me to discuss and rank all things Marvel Cinematic Universe just in time for Avengers Endgame. That guest, it's Andy Schmidt from Comics Experience, who in another life edited comics at Marvel like Annihilation, X-Factor, Captain America, and more. Are you ready to talk about some comic movies, Andy?
Yes, I am.
So I want to start, like, we're going to do a whole bunch of rankings, but I want to start with a little basics. What is you're currently reviewing all of the Marvel movies on your Facebook, and you know, generally it seems positive. We're still relatively early on. I'm curious, like, what's your general perspective on the Marvel movies? Do you like them, dislike them? What's up?
Yeah. I think that's why you reached out to me, is because I was doing this thing. So yeah, what I've been doing on the Facebook page is trying to look at them specifically as a storyteller. Like, what can we learn from them storytelling, and what did they try to do, and how do they execute? What were the problems going into one, or obstacles like to overcome? So it's actually forced me to look at them in a different perspective, because I have gotten to the point where I can just go into a movie theater and kind of, you know, check that part of my brain at the door, because I'm usually going with my kids, or at least my older son, and I just want to go in and, like, I just want to have fun, and so overall, like, I really like them. They are, generally speaking, quite fun movies, and, you know, I recognize the characters, and, you know, I certainly pick up on little Easter eggy things, and I probably don't catch everything now, but yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I like them. And as the reviews that I've been going through, like, I've got, you know, little categories. I think you've read some of them. And I do give sort of my overall, like, score out of 10 ranking. And they are high. A friend of mine said, like, did you box yourself into a corner with all these high scores early on? And I was like, well, not really. I don't think so. Like, I think they're like legitimately, they're you know, and I am looking at them. They are a superhero genre, so I'm not looking for them to do things that Remains of the Day does. Right? Like I'm looking for them to be really good superhero movies that focus on the characters and that kind of thing. And they figured some stuff out. That's the bottom line. Marvel Studios and the people that are involved have figured some really good stuff out, which is one of the reasons why I agreed to come on here, is because I won't say nasty things that Marvel and Disney get mad at me for.
I just want to say really quick, super randomly, when you were talking about, like, you're grading on a curve, and you were talking about, like, thinking about an example, for some reason in my head, I also thought of Remains of a Day, despite the fact I have never seen that movie, and I literally don't even know what it's about. I think Anthony Hopkins is in it.
Yep. Yeah. He buttles.
Okay.
He buttles a lot.
That is literally all I know about.
I think that's a term.
Yeah. I presume that means he's a butler, and so his action is buttling.
Buttling. Yeah.
I like it. Well,
the finest buttling movie I've ever seen.
It's a really big list, to be honest. I will give you credit. You know, the way that I knew for sure that you were the right person to come on is you similarly apparently love With a Winter Soldier, which we will, I'm sure, get to, but you gave that a 10 out of 10, which is the only accurate grade for that movie.
Well, all right. I'm glad we don't have to argue about that.
Well, I guess, you know, as a former Marvel editor, I did want to get your perspective on, like, you know, you worked on Annihilation, which fed into Guardians. You started building, like, the Star-Lord mini with Keith before it came together. You worked on Winter Soldier. You worked on some of the other stories. Is that, I mean, how does that change your relationship with them? Does that make you extra analytical, or are you just completely able to shut off that part of your brain and you just take a little, like, pleasure out of the fact that you touched on these a little bit?
I think it's a really good question, and it's changed over time, right? So I left Marvel in 2007, and so but I was still getting invites to some of the premieres, so I would still see some of the earlier films I would still see before I moved, like, with the Marvel crowd. And so, like, that's like a whole experience in and of itself, because you're going to a packed movie theater. It's usually like the week before, a couple days before it's released, and, like, there's just all this energy around that, like, eventiveness of it.
Oh yeah,
which is fairly infectious. And then, of course, there's the requisite going out afterwards and staying out till 8 a.m, dissecting the film. But as I have moved on in my life and gone on and done other things, like I'm still a fan, obviously, and I still, stay in touch with the characters and with a lot of people I worked with and stuff. But like I've gotten that distance. To me now, it's going in to enjoy a superhero movie of characters that I have enjoyed for years and years. And so I think I approached it pretty similar to the way that a lot of people do it. Now, I teach at Comics Experience. I teach storytelling. I teach not necessarily all the time about superheroes, but I use a lot of examples. So I do go in and like in the back of my brain, like I can't fully turn that off because I know I'm going to go back onto the message boards and wind up discussing, storytelling elements. So often I will go and see them like once just for like fun. And then the second time I see them, usually I see them once without my sons, and then I'll take my sons maybe the following week or something. And then I'll kind of go in if I think they're going to have fun, and then I'll sort of do more analytical stuff because it actually affects how I work and how I do things. So it's kind of I do both.
Right.
But the ones that I really worked on, that I spent time on the comics, like I do go into those a little differently. I get a little bit of a pit in my stomach before I go because like I just want it to be good.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's somehow if the movie is good, then I will feel like my small portion of the work on the comics was then somehow good or whatever. But I will tell you that, so Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one came out like 6 or 7 years after I left Marvel.
Right.
And I got an invite. They invited my wife and I to LA. We'd already moved away from New York a long time before that. And so they invited us up to LA for the red carpet premiere on that one.
Ooh.
Which was really cool. And that's different from like the ones in New York. Like occasionally like an actor or somebody will show up, but usually it's really just a screening for the company, which is a ton of fun and very cool. But the red carpet thing, like I drove my wife up from San Diego. It was like 2.5 hours to get there. And like we had to dress up and it was this whole thing, and it was nerve wracking. And there were all these comics people as well as, all the pomp and circumstance. But then we were sitting up in the balcony, and like the cast of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was right in front of us. Nathan Fillion was like 2 seats away from my wife. And so like there was all this like, and Andy Lanning actually was right behind me. So we were palling around, and right before like the curtain goes up or whatever, like I got this panic attack. It was not a full-on panic attack because I've had those before and those are terrifying, but it was pretty close to one. And all I could think of was like, please don't let this suck. Like, I just want my wife to have a good time. Like, she doesn't have to love it, but like, please don't suck, because I don't think I could look her in the eye if it does.
Right.
And then I was made comfortable before the opening credits were over because she was laughing at the whole Quill going into the thing singing rat, with an alien rat thing. So and like once she was having a good time, which happened quite quickly, thankfully, then I was able to relax. But like I had this like, oh man, it was this anxiety, because it was pretty funny because my wife was like, so what did you have to do with this? And I'm like, well, I mean, obviously I didn't have anything to do making the movie, but like, you remember when I would come home and work like 3 hours every night on this thing called Annihilation? And she was like, vaguely. I'm like, well, that's why I wasn't around for a year, is this thing kind of helped lead into all this sort of stuff. And so like, it was like this, it was this weird thing in our marriage. It wasn't bad for our marriage. It was just sort of this like black hole of time when I was working on Annihilation at home. But so I felt vindicated once she liked that movie.
That's great. Yeah. No, I mean, that's the thing is, I was thinking about it. Like I as a reader of comics go in, and there's like this inner desire for them to be good, or like I'm always like looking at it in like a slightly different way than my wife does. And I just always imagine somebody like you who had like a connection to stories like that, and to like the Winter Soldier, would have that like exacerbated because you have an even deeper connection to it. I mean, I just like happened to read the comics. You were like involved with those stories, and I don't know. That was something I was always curious about.
Yeah, it definitely affects it changes your opinion, but like I went into Iron Man 3 not realizing how much that story was going to pull from Extremis.
Right, a lot.
I had worked on. Right, yeah, and I just didn't realize that going in. So like I came out of Iron Man 3 and I was like, "Oh, that was really cool. They used a bunch of stuff on that comic I worked on. Like that was neat."
I have to admit, never in a million years did I think I'd see Extremis in a movie.
I didn't either.
Yeah. Well, last question before we get into the rankings. As a general consumer, post editor, Andy, we're going to be releasing this right before Endgame goes up. What are your expectations for Endgame? Do you have like any excitement level for it? Where you at?
I'm definitely excited. I mean, like generally, this is like I feel like this is a conversation I have with my kids. My kids are like, "So do you know what's going to happen?" And I'm like, "Well,
Kinda.
yeah, basically, like because I've read it already." And there are some things that are like pretty clearly set up, but I expect and what I want out of it is there to be surprises along the way.
Yeah.
Like, do I think Thanos is going to be defeated in the end? I think that's fairly likely. But how that happens isn't necessarily going to be the same way it happens in Infinity Gauntlet. I actually hope it isn't. And most of what I really enjoy about these movies is the characters and how they interact with each other. So for me, I get like my enjoyment tends to be sort of moment to moment stuff, like, oh, that was a really great exchange, or that was a super fun action sequence. Like it's how they differ from the source material while still being faithful that is really the source of my enjoyment. So I was legitimately surprised in an Infinity War in the Gamora Soul Gem scene,
right?
But I thought it was awesome. Like I hated it because I love Gamora, but I was like, this is great. Like the fact that I'm going into the 22nd movie in this saga, and I've read the source material, and they still got me with like a really legitimate surprise is fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, that's just really smart storytelling. And that's the type of thing that like I personally really respond to.
You get a lot to respond to in these movies because I was trying to, we were going to have a surprise category and I was struggling to a certain degree with that, but I don't know. I mean, I think one of the things that is the most impressive about the whole thing is the fact that we're this far in and they've managed to make people care so much about these characters' lives. And that's, I think, one of the trickiest things to do and something that can be tough in these types of movies of making you like invested in their lives and making people are like honestly horrified of the idea that Captain America is going to die. Like that is in like not just comic book world, but in literally the entire earth is concerned about that. and it's kind of amazing. I think they did a remarkable job of making these people are these characters people that you want to hang out with, even for 3 hours and 2 minutes, which is really, that is like the ultimate heat check by Marvel. It's like they didn't announce the movie's name until like 3 months ago or 4 months ago or whatever. And then they're like, oh yeah, and it's 3 hours long. People are like, I don't care. I can't wait. I need it.
Yeah, I think now would be a good time to just come clean and say, I believe I am the only editor with the distinction of having killed Captain America twice in a single year.
Yes.
So I was working on Cap when he was killed at the end of Civil War in the comics, and I also was the editor on what was originally Captain America the End, and came out as Captain America the Chosen, and he dies in that also.
I also want to point out something I was thinking about when you were talking about the differences between this and Infinity Gauntlet is the fact that you in Annihilation 100% did not want to use Adam Warlock. They also similarly agree. Because, I mean, granted, he hasn't appeared yet, but at the same time, it's like, doesn't seem like he's going to come into play. I don't think. That'd be amazing if he did.
Yeah, I mean, they've set, like, I feel like they set him up. Like,
in Guardians Volume 2 and 1.
Yeah, they, like, there's definitely references to him, although I feel like bringing him in now, and honestly, I feel a little bit this way about Captain Marvel, is
right.
Feel like it's a little bit too late to add a major player who's going to come in and drastically affect the outcomes of
like Deus Ex Captain Marvel.
Right. Yeah. Like that would I mean, at least Captain Marvel had a movie.
Right.
I mean, it might have just, it might only be a month old, but at least we all know who she is, and we like her now. But yeah, I mean, I do feel like if you bring Adam Warlock in at Endgame and he starts solving problems, then I don't think audiences will like that.
I think my personal, like, how much I would love that level would be entirely dependent on whether or not Pip is a character in the movie as well. Because if
that's a fair point. If you have a cigar smoking troll along with him, that goes a long way.
Exactly. Yeah. It makes me. I'm like, okay, I can hang because Pip's there. If it was just Adam Warlock, we just have this creepy weirdo speaking. Like, I mean, I feel like he kind of like exists within the Visions realm, anyways, of this guy who's like way too peaceful and is just like calm about all this stuff, and then just does magical stuff that no one understands.
Yeah, I've never been a huge fan of the character. I don't dislike the character or anything, but I've never been a huge fan of him. And also the cinematic universe seems to largely kind of stay away from sort of the more ethereal, like the Tweener and the Living Tribunal. Like the Living Tribunal gets a mention in Doctor Strange. Like this is, I think it's like one of the weapons.
Right.
Like, this is the staff of the Living Tribunal. And for those of us that know the Living Tribunal, you're like, oh, hey, it's the Living Tribunal.
Yeah.
Never thought I was going to hear that in a movie.
Yeah. We did get the Celestials and Ego, though. So it's somewhere, it's maybe being considered. We'll see. I guess if they do an Eternals movie, it's definitely going to open things up a bit. I guess they are doing an Eternals movie. Well, we got a lot to get to. We'll get as much in as we can on the categories. Thanks to everyone who submitted the topics. Let's get to power ranking some things. I want to start with, I'm randomizing these. I want to start with something that kind of fits, given the fact we just mentioned Pip. Let's start with favorite deep cuts, as in unexpected characters that aren't stars in the movie. One of my favorite things about the movies is that they don't just have like the main characters; they have all these random ones. Who are 4 characters that you love seeing on the screen that are like deep cuts?
Wong.
Yes.
I think Wong is great in Doctor Strange. He might be my favorite part of that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like him a lot in Infinity War.
Yeah. And I like that he wants a tuna melt.
Right.
My question is, does he get a tuna melt?
It makes me want a tuna melt. So I would definitely go with Wong, and I think I would go with Korg.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah, Korg's on my list. Yeah,
yeah. Not a character that like I was ever thinking like, man, I really want to see Korg, but then he's just so darn entertaining that I'm definitely on board with him. And basically all of the women in Black Panther.
Oh yeah,
like they're all awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I like all of them. And then I've never been able to say it, like the Dora Milaje.
Yeah,
Black
I think it's Dora Milaje. I could be wrong though.
Okoye is amazing.
Yeah,
awesome.
She might be the best part of that movie. Her or Shuri, one of the two.
Shuri's so good, so good. Yeah, I don't know. And then I also love the Collector. I love Benicio del Toro as the Collector. Like that is great. And like I don't know, I can't tell you how many times I've seen Guardians of the Galaxy, but every time Rocket like imitates him with the
hand movement.
Yeah, like every time. I know it's coming. I know exactly what it looks and sounds like, and I always start laughing.
It's so good. It's so good. Yeah, I think 2 of the neither of them are on my list, but I think the fact that we got, I forgot what the name of the Titans, I guess, or whatever the Collector and the Grandmaster are. I love that we got Benicio del Toro and Jeff Goldblum, 2 genuinely great actors for these very small roles that they completely nail. And like Benicio del Toro, one of the things I really love about a lot of the smaller roles, which you will definitely see in the people I have on my list, is that they seem like they genuinely have a ton of fun with it. Like Benicio del Toro is having a blast.
Yeah, and so is Goldblum.
Oh yeah, totally.
For sure.
My list has Korg as well. I have Cosmo just because even though Cosmo does not like telepathically talk to anybody, the fact that we have a Russian cosmonaut dog just randomly walking around the screen, like licking Benicio del Toro is pretty spectacular.
That is great. My kids love that too.
I love Claw. I think Andy Serkis's Claw is one of
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
One of the best. Yeah, and he is if Benicio del Toro has fun, like Andy Serkis is having some illegal level of fun that people cannot reach because he's just nobody enjoys being in a Marvel movie more than Andy Serkis. And then lastly, I brought this up a lot on my show, but my wife can quote Arnim Zola, which will never not be amazing to me. Like, she loves quoting the stuff in Winter Soldier where he's like, first correction, I am Swiss.
Right. We are both of us out of time. Yeah, I wouldn't have put Arnim Zola on that list because he's in 2 movies.
I know.
But I guess he's only in the one scene in Winter Soldier. But Arnim Zola is great. And one of the things that, like one of the first moments in when I first saw the first Captain America, there's a lot of firsts in there, where I'm just so on board with this movie. I mean, the first is when Red Skull, like right off the bat, makes a Raiders of the Lost Ark reference, talking about Hitler digging for trinkets in the desert. And then the first time that we see Arnim Zola is on a TV screen.
Yeah. So
the camera pans past him on the TV screen, and then you see him standing there being filmed. And I was like, yeah, I'm in. Like, you guys know exactly what you're doing. And it would be ridiculous to have the actual Arnim Zola character design on here. And I'm glad you did not do that. But just that passing reference to it was enough to make me buy in that the people making this movie loved the source material. And if you feel like the people making the movie love that source material, like, I'm instantly okay with like tons of changes because I'm like, it's okay because they love it too and they're making changes and it's okay. Like it's me at ease.
So the moment for me with the first Avenger, which I actually think is probably maybe the most underrated Marvel movie. It's really good and it doesn't get as much love. But the scene where Steve Rogers, when he's in his like 90-pound weakling mode, jumps on the grenade to protect everybody, so single-handedly sold me on them understanding. Yeah, exactly. Like that every time I watch that, I get like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a combination of like slightly verklempt and like my skin like just pops. It's just like my hair is like rising, like I'm Spider-Man with his Spidey sense. It just is an incredible moment.
Yeah, I agree. And I love, and also in that movie, the other moment that just, and this was like, I'm 100% in on this film, which happened like 4 times in that movie because I do love that movie. I ranked it a 9 out of 10. Is when the doctor asks him, "So you want to kill Nazis?"
No,
I don't want to kill anybody. I just don't like bullies. And I'm like, not only is that like you've just perfectly framed Steve Rogers for me and why he will be Captain America and why he already is Captain America despite not having the physical attributes. But it also circumvents the larger sort of geopolitical issue that Marvel was going to have to deal with, which is America not loved everywhere around the world. And this movie has to play everywhere around the world. And so like, I love that for sort of the larger 50,000 foot view thing of like how simply you just skirted that issue.
Oh yeah.
Like that's such smart writing.
Yeah.
But then also like, and you nailed the character at the same time. And it wouldn't have worked if they tried to find some other way. Like the fact that getting around that potential issue for a worldwide audience had to do with how you nail down that character is what makes it work in getting around that issue. So, I mean, there's so many smart things in that first Captain America movie that I agree with you. I tell people how good that movie is, and I get this sort of like, are you sure we're talking about the same movie?
I think people blame the special effects.
Absolutely. Well, but again, like the special effects, because that movie is in World War II, and they are not doing they're not trying to make Saving Private Ryan, right? They are trying to do this sort of how we felt about World War II. Like, it's Joe Johnston who, hadn't so much to do with Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it's that same sort of thing. It's how we kind of, it sounds weird to say like how we want World War II to have been.
Right.
On some level. Man, I hope that doesn't get taken out of context.
I think people know what you're saying. I mean, honestly, that's why Joe Johnston was the perfect person to make it. He's so good at evoking that era in general. I mean, I love October Sky, and like he makes me nostalgic for like Sputnik, and I was not even remotely alive during that time.
Right.
I mean, he's really good at like kind of bringing like the most positive feelings about a period. Like, you know, obviously it was a super dark time, but it was like a time where the country was united and everything like that. It's a really interesting movie for a lot of reasons. But yeah, I do want to go back to Arnim Zola really quick. Arnim Zola, like, I think the reason why he counts as a deep cut for me is because I never expected to see him in a movie, because he's so goofy. He's like a dude in like he's basically Krang from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, except for with like a hologram face. And granted, Arnim Zola was around first, but still, I mean, he's not exactly somebody I ever expected to see in a movie, let alone done well.
Yeah. Well, again, Toby Jones, like one of who said that? Somebody said this to me recently, that Marvel Studios' secret weapon is Sarah Haley Flynn.
Is that the casting director?
The casting director. And I think she has done every single one of them. And the casting in these movies is amazing. Every single time I've been like, I don't know about that. I've been wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think they've had any like major casting issue. Not every single, bit part has been phenomenal, but like, what a batting average.
I know, seriously.
Like, it's ridiculous.
Yo, everybody. I want to take a second to talk about my friends at TKO Studios. TKO Studios is a new comic publisher that launched with what the New York Times calls an impressive slate of talent. They publish books by top creators, including Roxane Gay, Jeff Lemire, Garth Ennis, Gabriel Walta, and many more. TKO also does things differently than other publishers. They binge release their books and offer each title in whatever format you most enjoy reading your comics in, whether that's a 6-issue set in a collector's box, trade paperback, or digital download. I'm a single issues guy, so I went that route and I love the collector's box. Even better, all of TKO's first issues are free to read at tkopresents.com right now. So if you're curious, visit tkopresents.com to give them a try, or follow at TKO Presents across all social platforms. And if you're a store that's interested in stocking TKO's books, email retailers at tkopresents.com to learn more about one of the best retailer deals in the industry. And now, back to the show. Well, that's a perfect transition to the next category. Let's do castings, just because you're actively talking about Sarah Haley Flynn's efforts. I'll go first on this one. I have some oddballs mixed in with the obvious ones. I'm sure there's going to be a couple that we have overlap on. The whole thing rests on Iron Man working and Tony Stark working and Robert Downey Jr. No one in the world could play him better. I'm confident in saying that. Similarly, Tom Hiddleston as Loki is just absolutely impeccably casted. I think he actually, if I'm understanding correctly, he actually went in for Thor. And
I think that's right.
Yeah. And the fact that he ended up getting cast as Loki was just such a fortuitous thing. If he hadn't went in for Thor, I don't even know who would have actually played him. But no one, I mean, he is about as perfectly cast as any, like, besides maybe Robert Downey Jr. I'm gonna give like a major thumb in their, or feather in their cap for the Grandmaster, Jeff Goldblum. I guess I didn't really have a significant vision of the Grandmaster besides West Coast Avengers Annual 2, where he abducts all of the Avengers and West Coast Avengers and makes them fight each other. Like, basically, he just seemed like this mustache twirling dude who watches people fight. And I guess that's kind of what Jeff Goldblum is, but I love him in it. And then the other one is Letitia Wright as Shuri.
She's amazing.
She really is. I honestly had never seen her in anything else. And so the fact that they found her and they made a role that fit her so well, and she brought so much out of it. The thing that I really, really love about her performance in that is the fact that her and T'Challa actually feel like brother and sister. They're really good at working together, and it makes the whole thing work that much better. I love her. And also, she really genuinely feels like the smartest person in the room in a way that even, Tony Stark doesn't necessarily feel. Who do you got?
Well, I've got it's pretty darn similar. I will tell you that the one, like, of all the like really great actors that have been involved in, from small parts like to large ones, the two of like the like totally A-list, you know, actors that have been around for years and years, the two that for me like just like they had to be perfect or are even better than perfect are Stanley Tucci in the first Captain America.
Yes.
So good in that role. That role has to work in order for that movie to work, and that movie has to work in order for Captain America to be the moral center of the MCU, which could be a whole nother conversation. But so Stanley Tucci for me, I would add, and Robert Redford in The Winter Soldier.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
it, and I don't know, like I've got maybe some kind of a man crush or something on Robert Redford. I don't know what it is, but any movie he's in, I feel like I know him.
Yeah.
And he brings such reality to his roles. Like I watched a Robert Redford movie like a few months ago that I'm blanking on the name of.
Was it The Old Man and the Gun? No.
No.
Okay.
It's not a new one. It's an older one, and it's one where he like gets kidnapped and like taken into the woods. And it's called like The Vanishing or something like that. Anyway, it's really good. But because like I remember sitting there going like, oh, the script is good. The script's good, but it's not like this unbelievable script. But like Robert Redford just sells every scene he's in a way that most actors can't. I just get emotionally invested. And so to have Robert Redford, to have the guy who took down Richard Nixon, you know, in All the President's Men, and is so awesome in Sneakers and all these other films, and to have him be the big bad guy in Winter Soldier, like still like makes my skin crawl.
It's also so fitting because it really is like in a lot of ways a political thriller. And he is like perfect for that era and type of movie. Like just having Robert Redford in there. What's that?
Yeah. 3 Days of the Condor and
yeah, exactly. Also, I just want to say really quick, fitting like hilariously, you have your Robert Redford man crush. I actually have a Paul Newman one, so it's like we got a duo thing going on.
I also have a Paul Newman man crush. I used to tell people that Paul Newman taught me how to be a man. I don't say that anymore because it sounds masochistic. but yeah, like Cool Hand Luke, like that's the most like manly portrayal ever put on film, as far as I'm concerned.
I saw The Sting when I was like 12, and I ended up watching all of the Robert Redford and Paul Newman movies, and I just loved it. Like Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid.
I was so excited when my son got old enough that I could show him Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
It's amazing.
And he loved it. Like he was like, this might be the best movie I've ever seen. And I was like, you're darn right it is. Yeah, that movie's it's so good. But yeah, so Robert Redford to me just like absolutely is maybe the most perfect casting of all of it. Man, that's, I mean, you hit the others. Here's one. I referenced this in my, because I've already posted on Facebook the reviews for Thor and Thor Dark World, and Natalie Portman I think gets no credit
right
for her role in the first Thor, and I think she's wonderful, and I think it's woefully underused in Thor the Dark World. But in the first Thor, I think she is phenomenal because it's much more on her shoulders to sell not just their relationship, but to sell her like girlish crush
right
on Thor, which is so entertaining and so like lighthearted but real at the same time. But she has to be the reason that Thor starts to change.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of responsibility to put on the weight of a supporting character. And so I think she's vastly underrated and largely forgotten for her performance. And then the last one that I would add to your list is, so I knew I should have written these down because I always wind up blanking in the moment.
I'll know it. What
it's
character?
Heimdall.
Heimdall. Oh, Idris Elba.
Yes, Idris Elba is phenomenal. And obviously I'm not the only one that agrees with this, because Heimdall goes from being a guy that's around in Asgard to being like this important character. Like he gets bigger and bigger roles as it goes along because he's just so freaking awesome. Heimdall has there's no reason for Heimdall to be like cool at all.
It's also a tough character to work too.
He's just not a cool character. Yet Idris Elba's just so darn cool.
Yeah, he is really amazing.
That like just when he talks and he's got his glowing eyes, and then just when he's talking, he's like, "No one has gotten past me until today." You're like, "You are a badass," and that is it. Yeah, it's amazing.
Do you mind if I dial back to Robert Redford real quick? Sure. I have one quick comment about that. The only part about the Winter Soldier I don't like is, that scene where he's meeting with the Winter Soldier in his kitchen, and like the woman comes in, his I don't know, house cleaner or whatever, and she like sees them and he kills her. My problem is not killing her. My problem is the fact that when he's meeting with him, he pours a glass of milk that is the stupidest pour of milk that's ever existed. It is like a quarter ounce of milk, and then he like goes to sit down to drink it. I'm like, that is barely, like, that's not even a gulp. That's just like a sip. And like he has this tiny pour. I'm like, who drinks milk like this, Robert Redford? You're embarrassing yourself. I'm guessing it was just because he can't just keep drinking milk over and over and over for that scene. But at the same time, I'm like, every time I see that, I'm just like, come on, guy. This is so unrealistic. That's my petty complaint about the Winter Soldier.
Well, all right, maybe it's a 9.5 out of 10. Losing a half a point for a poor milk pour.
It should be a 9.8 because it's 2% milk. There we go.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Anyways, that's a very small thing to burn Robert Redford on it. All right. Well, let's jump into something that's not related to acting at all. This is just a quick take by me, but I think one of the weakest parts about the MCU in general is the fact that this is no slander to the people who work on it, but the scores are generally at best serviceable. I think that they work, but they're never there aren't any like themes that, like, there are some themes, like I think Thor works pretty well, the theme, and then like the Avengers theme works pretty well, but it's not, there's rarely really great scores. There are some good ones though, and I wanted to go over our 4 favorite scores. You want to kick us off? Do you have any score thoughts?
I do. I didn't write these down, but so I don't know if it's 4. It might be 3, it might be 5.
That's fine.
But I would go Black Panther.
Yep. I mean, it's an Oscar-winning one.
Yeah, unique and distinct. And we're talking scores, not like songs put in, right?
Right. Scores.
I'd go Winter Soldier. Henry Jackman is great.
And in the Winter Soldier villain theme, which you wrote about in your review, is one of the most distinct pieces. And like they continue to use that throughout the movies, and it's
right.
It really.
And Henry Jackman did Winter Soldier and Civil War, and I kind of equate them. Civil War does like even goes further because it incorporates a lot of the other themes because it's got all the characters. So
right.
That one's really pretty top notch. I'd go Thor because Patrick Doyle's like that's really our first really heroic sounding theme.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And then Avengers because Alan Silvestri comes up with a really good Avengers theme, and basically that's what you want. Like the golden ticket is if you can get Superman's theme.
Exactly.
Right? Like that's really what you're going for. And which is not to take away from the scores that do a really nice job of integrating. There's only 1 or 2 that I find like distracting.
Oh boy. I'm probably going to choose one.
Oh, you go. Let's hear I don't like talking about the stuff that I don't like as much. I'd rather talk about stuff that's really awesome. So you go with your list.
Okay, so my list is I also had Winter Soldier and Black Panther. I really like. I know that is very atypical relative to the rest, but I feel like the Doctor Strange theme or score that Michael Giacchino did works really well. I do think it borrows a bit from his Star Trek stuff, but at the same time, I do think it works for the character. And it's also like when his theme pops up in Infinity War when he's fighting Thanos, like that's a really nice moment, and it immediately speaks to the character. And really, ultimately, like with a lot of this stuff, you're just trying to come up with something like with Thor that immediately brings to mind the character, and that's a little tough to do. And then the other one I have is, while it's not as prominent as the music in the movie, I think Tyler Bates does some really great stuff in Guardians of the Galaxy. Like there's the one spot where they're coming out of the Milano after they crash into the Dark Aster, and Groot like shoots up those spores, like the
Oh yeah,
the
that's
lights.
wonderful.
Yeah, that track's called Groot Spores, and it's an absolutely wonderful little moment. And it's not something that ever really kind of comes back up. It's not like a recurring Groot theme, but at the same time, it is like a really nice piece. And there are several small pieces in there. The problem is like I don't think people really pay attention to them because they're too busy jamming to all the music in it. Fair enough.
Right. No, I agree with you. I think Tyler Bates did a really nice job on Guardians of the Galaxy. It feels more space-y.
Yes.
Like it feels more science fiction-y. It's got more of the sort of it's not techno, but more like synthesizery sort of stuff that kind of works.
Sure.
I also think that both the first Iron Man and Incredible Hulk have like sort of underrated scores. Iron Man does have a theme that recurs that I think works quite well, but I actually think that's possibly, it's hard to say in 22, it's possibly the best soundtrack for the movie itself. Like scene to scene, that soundtrack is on target and is always additive. That's probably the best like scene to scene soundtrack. I was kind of thinking in terms of themes, and I also think the Hulk is quite good by Craig Armstrong, I think.
Like the original Hulk or like the Incredible Hulk?
The Incredible Hulk. That one's really good. It's just not heroic.
Right.
It's more like a horror movie. which is kind of cool. But I think that movie gets kind of dumped on a lot, and it's not my my favorite of the bunch, but it has some strengths. I think the soundtrack is actually one of its biggest strengths. And you were right. You did name like my least favorite is Doctor Strange.
I mean that's
I do like his theme, but I feel like that soundtrack is just beating me over the head through most of that movie, and it keeps taking me out of the movie because it keeps calling attention to itself. But I have that issue with several of his scores, not just the Doctor Strange. So I think it's just stylistically he and I are not aligned.
Yeah, it is an interesting score because I feel like the way that like the instrumentation in particular is going to be a very your mileage may vary type thing. It's like you're either going to really like it or you're probably going to be like, what the hell am I listening to? And I guess that's what happens when you mess with harpsichords.
Right, but I also think Ant-Man has a it's
a good one.
Ant-Man has a really good theme. It feels very heisty. It's so like I've heard that complaint, and the other complaint I know we're going to get into it is the villain complaint, right? I've heard the soundtrack complaint, and I get it. Like they're not all standouts, but there aren't any that are really like, well, that soundtrack sucks. Like, you know what I mean? Like at worst, they're good.
Yeah, that's what I was saying is like, they're not, I don't think that there are any bad scores. I think the biggest problem with them is, and maybe this isn't even a problem, it's just purely texture, I guess. And it's like, I think a lot of people, the problems that like critics have with the MCU movies is like, they're made to be kind of outside of the story itself and the performances, very like non-threatening. They're just there. And so it's like whether that's like the way that they shoot the fight scenes or the colors or whatever, but the score is definitely amongst that. I think that they're all like solid enough and they do their job and like that's what they're supposed to do. I guess there's when you think of superhero movies, there's so many like immediate themes that pop to your head, but I guess not all of them are done by John Williams.
not all of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Just half of them.
You mentioned the villains. Let's do 4 best villains, but let's start by saying, like, do you think that there's a problem with the villains?
No, and actually, I was just talking about this morning on my Creators Workshop message boards. We were having this discussion because I'm posting my reviews. They get an advanced look at the reviews.
Oh,
so I'm actually further along than what I posted on Facebook. But somebody was bringing up like, do I think they're weak on villains? And I don't look at it as weak or strong. I look at it as a conscious decision that I think Marvel Studios made.
Sure.
And so the counterpoint is they want to focus on the heroes of the films.
Right.
And in order to do that, they're willing to go a little lighter on the villains, like make them not as deep and maybe one or at 2-dimensional. There are some exceptions to that, obviously, but I think that's a very conscious choice because they want you to come out of that movie going, Iron Man was awesome. Thor was awesome, not Obadiah Stane was really scary, right? Like,
which is a thought that no one has ever had,
right? But but and my counterpoint to that is if you look at the 1989 Batman franchise, like all four of those, or even Batman Begins, Dark Knight, and Dark Knight Rises, you spend a lot more time on the villains than you do on the hero.
Right.
And yeah, the Joker in The Dark Knight may be the best comic book villain ever put on film, but who's Batman?
Right. Exactly.
And I'm not saying that as a criticism of that movie, because I love The Dark Knight, but Marvel Marvel Studios has, I think, made a very conscious decision to hedge their bets and go, I'm willing to maybe not have a great villain, as if it means that I'm more confident that you're going to love the hero coming out of it. And I'm not saying they're consciously saying I want I don't think they want one-dimensional villains or even two-dimensional villains, but I think they're willing to make that sacrifice if they think it increases the chances that you're going to come out of the way going, I can't imagine a MCU without Captain America, like
right.
I said earlier. So bearing that in mind, I feel like it's a very conscious decision. I feel like it is a superly obviously conscious decision in the Avengers, the first Avengers movie, because Whedon is not known for writing one-dimensional characters, and there's really nothing to Loki. There's nothing to the plan. The plan is open a portal in the sky above New York and jump through it and start shooting at people in random office buildings.
Right.
That's Loki's master plan.
Not a very good one.
As Tony Stark says, not a great plan. So that's clearly a conscious decision that allows for that movie to keep a tight, quick pace, and spend 85% of the time with the Avengers, not figuring out the plot mechanics to the villain or what cool tricks the villain has up its sleeve. That's the only movie where Loki is boring.
Right. Well, fittingly, I feel like he's going to be on both of our lists, though, as a villain.
Yeah, because that's the only time he's boring. He's awesome in all three Thor movies. Yeah, he's clearly the winner, I think.
So who else would you have up there? I figure we're gonna have at least one more overlap. I have a random one that I think a lot of people don't like, but I'm 100% on board with them. But you go with your list.
Okay, the one that I like that I imagine is likely not on your list is Killian from Iron Man 3.
Oh, well, I love Guy Pearce, and I think he's, that's the funny thing. I don't like, Iron Man 3 is one of the movies that I actually don't really like. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I actually both like Killian a lot, and I really love James Badge Dale as his, sidekick.
As his right-hand man?
Yeah, he's great. He's really good. I mean, I actually just think James Badge Dale is fantastic, period. But so I have no problem with Killian. He's not on my list, but he's definitely an interesting villain.
And then I really like it's not that I like Zemo so much from Civil War. It's just that that's the most interesting plan.
I love Zemo. Zemo is the one that was on my list.
So Zemo's really okay. So we're in agreement. Zemo's really cool, and I forget the actor's name who plays him.
Daniel Bruhl.
Yeah, Bruhl does an amazing job, making me care and hate him at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's really amazing about Baron Zemo is one of my friends, I remember after he watched it, is I can't believe he didn't put the sock on his head, wear the purple. Why would he do that?
I was about to make a joke about that. He clearly doesn't nail it because he doesn't put a purple sock with lines on it.
Exactly, and fur at the top for some unknown reason. But I mean, Baron Zemo. The thing about him is as you said, he's the one that actually has a plan that makes sense. And the thing is
and he's more well-rounded.
He's really well-rounded. He actually has reasoning behind his action that really that matches the impetus for why Black Panther's doing his stuff, why Tony Stark is doing what he's doing.
Yeah, thematically it all works very well. The whole movie is about vengeance versus justice.
Exactly. And the thing is he's not interested in winning. He's interested in destroying them. He has that line. I don't remember what the line is exactly, but he's just if a villain destroys you, you'll get back together. But if you destroy yourselves, then it's over. And that's
right,
all.
Yeah,
that's,
an empire that's toppled from the outside can rebuild and come back, but an empire that destroys itself from within, dies forever, or something like that. Yeah, it's a really good bit. I like him a lot. I think that's the most interesting villain of all of them, because a lot of them wind up becoming just like, they're like, we're evil, right, so we're gonna do some evil things. And I know a lot of people love the Vulture, and I thought Michael Keaton was great as Vulture. I like him a lot. I thought Killmonger was great in Black Panther. And everything about the Winter Soldier is fantastic. Mm-hmm. So it's not fair to be like 6 out of the 20.
well, Killmonger is on my list too, and he's actually like the only one that really competes with Loki as the best villain for me, because like Zemo, you can understand his reasoning for it. The other one on my list is also very obvious. It's Thanos. Like, I think Josh Brolin is fantastic as. I mean, I honestly, like, I'm kind of amazed by how well Thanos works in the movies. Part of it is because Brolin is so calm and so like reasonable in his delivery. Like, there's that whole speech he does to Tony Stark at the end where he's talking about, it's like, like, I hope your people remember you, or whatever it is. It's such like a boss move, but like, he is the prototypical villain who doesn't see himself as the villain. And that's same with Killmonger. Like, Killmonger, one of the most interesting things about Black Panther is like, it is an honest to goodness MCU movie that could lead to philosophical debates. And I'm certainly not saying that Killmonger is right in what he's saying, but I could see why somebody would think that. And it's really that's why I think that those two villains and Zemo are interesting, even on a level that Loki's not at, is that they actually are like, they survive like a thought experiment of like, what is their motivation, what is their reasoning. A lot of Loki's stuff is just kind of like, he's just a great villain. Like the first Thor movie.
My issue with Loki has always been not that he's the trickster, but because he is the trickster because ultimately he wants to be a trickster.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've never really understood, like, so Loki wakes up one day and Thor and the rest of the gods are out of his way. So what does he do? He does nothing, because all he wants to do is play pranks on these guys.
Right.
So like, where with Zemo and some of the others, like, I get it, but like, yeah, Zemo and I think, can lead to sort of, like you were saying, like some interesting discussions. Thanos can, and Killmonger can, and I think you get some interesting discussions out of Winter Soldier.
For
like
sure.
Robert Redford's plan, if to build a new world, you got to tear the old one down. Like, they're usually along sort of similar themes, but yeah, like the only real villain that disappointed me was Ultron.
Oh yeah.
Because I have always loved Ultron. I've always thought Ultron should be bigger and better and more villainous than he has been. The one exception to that is the Ultron Unlimited storyline, and with Busiek and Perez. He's pretty villainous in that. But like, I've always felt like, and I really thought Age of Ultron was going to be like, this is going to be the rallying point where every other Ultron story has to compete with this one, and it just wasn't quite.
Yeah, I actually somebody had me on their podcast this week. They're doing like this series where they have every single MCU movie talked about in an individual podcast, and they had me on for Age of Ultron. They gave me 3 choices, and it was like the one that was available that was remotely interesting to me was Age of Ultron, because it was just it's kind of a ridiculous movie. And in that podcast, I said that Ultron is the 3rd best villain in that movie, behind Claw, who is amazing, and then the second one is the irresponsible parent who lets her child run away during Sokovia flying away and ends up killing Quicksilver.
I would put Baron Strucker in there. I like him too.
Yeah, he's good too. Yeah, okay, maybe it's fourth. But anyways, I think that was my villain hot take for Age of Ultron, but I stand by it. Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick second to talk about my friends over at SpinnerRack.com. When I was a kid, I loved spinner racks. They helped me get into comics as I'd spin them and discover comics to love starring the X-Men, Batman, and beyond. And then they disappeared. But now they're back as the team over at Classic Spinner Rack produced new spinner racks for comic fans to purchase that both evoke nostalgia and look amazing in your home. I got mine in the mail and quickly set it up in my office right by where I podcast and had a blast picking some of my favorite comics to go in it. Sure, it's got copies of classic issues like the Avengers #1 and X-Men #4, but it also has personal favorites like Non-Player and Buddy Cops. It both looks great and makes it easy to read some of my favorite books. Want your own spinner rack? You can buy your own at spinnerrack.com, and when you order, use the code OFFPANEL, all in caps, to save 10% when you do. Order yours today, and I guarantee you'll love yours just as much as I do. And now, back to the show. All right, this is another random one. Let's do 3 favorite random moments. Cannot be like a big moment, so it's not like one of the big scenes everybody talks about. I'll go first just because I have one scene that I don't know why I absolutely love and I quote a lot. In the first Avengers movie, we have a random Harry Dean Stanton appearance when the Hulk flies through a roof, and he's like helping out the Hulk, and he's like, "Son, you got a condition." It is the funniest line to me for some reason, and it just, pluses or minuses for Joss Whedon, but not many directors would have that scene in that movie, and it really works for me. I love it. It's just completely ridiculous, and also the fact he has to give him pants and stuff like that is great. Another one for me is I love the my wife is like a Thor movie truther. She actually loves the first two Thor movies, but the first one works for me in a lot of ways. But I love all of the God out of water stuff where he's just rolling around like asking for a horse and stuff like that. But
that's the one from Thor when he just walks into a pet store and says, "I need a horse." Nailed it.
My favorite one though is when he's drinking coffee and he's like, "What is this beverage? I like it," and then he smashes it on the ground and says, "Another." I mean, anything that's set in a diner is going to be a great selling point for me, but Thor's engagement with coffee is similar to my own, like, idealistic engagement with coffee. And then last, this barely counts as a random moment, but anytime Luis tells a story in Ant-Man, those are just perfect moments. Even in the second one, when he does the truth serum stuff, it's incredible.
My wife and I were just talking about that. So I was watching Ant-Man, because I'm doing the reviews, and she comes in and she sees Luis and she's like, "Oh, that's my favorite part of the movie for sure." I'm like, "Oh yeah, he's the best part of this movie." Like, I really like Paul Rudd as Ant-Man, but just that he gets to tell those stories that way is great. And the callback in Ant-Man and the Wasp that allows him to do that again is phenomenal, because now I haven't caught back up to Ant-Man and the Wasp. I've only seen that one once, but if my memory serves, he gets the truth serum and then they ask like a question like, not what's up with Scott Lang, but it's something that allows him to start talking about like his troubles in life.
Yeah.
It's so great. And when Evangeline Lilly is saying the words with his voice, perfect. I'd go. And I don't know why I didn't think about this when we were talking about actors in smaller parts, but Ben Kingsley.
Oh, so good.
When he gets found out as not the Mandarin, and this is maybe my favorite bit of dialogue in any of the Marvel movies, but like, so the bad guys come in and rescue him, I guess, and they knock out Tony Stark, and the guy knows that Ben Kingsley is an idiot, and so he goes up to him and says, "Did you tell him anything?" He's like, "No." He's like, "Well, what happened? You're sure you didn't panic or whatever the line is?" He's like, "Well, I did panic, but then I handled it." And then he cracks open a beer and starts drinking. I love it. My brother and I quote that all the time. Like, well, I did panic, but then I handled it.
I love the part where when he first gets found out and everything like that, and he's being interrogated, and he just randomly breaks into like a soccer themes or like song because his team scores or whatever.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, Ben Kingsley, like the whole handling of the Mandarin was very Ra's al Ghul from Batman Begins, but at the same time, it was hilarious. So I don't care. It worked really well.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah. I think that's my favorite, just like oddball, like bit. I think. I'm trying to think of the other smaller moments that I like. I agree with you on Thor. Like the God out of water stuff is is by far my favorite. There's a ton of stuff in Winter Soldier that I really like, but they're just like character interactions. But I do enjoy Rocket when they all stand up at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy. It's like, now I'm standing. Bunch of jackasses standing. Or whatever it is. Like that's good stuff, because it's true. One of the things, and I said this in my review of Guardians, is that they're their own biggest problem throughout that movie, but that all comes from character.
Right.
Like that's exactly right. And that was something I was thinking about when you were talking about Zemo on Civil War. That one of the most interesting choices to me is one that like just probably never would have occurred to me as a writer. But when they get to the Winter Soldier area,
right,
like base, and all the Winter Soldiers are dead, that makes perfect sense from a character standpoint. But I don't know that it ever would have occurred to me as a writer,
right,
that he would kill them. That like there would be some mission he wanted to send them on. He wants to send them to, I don't know, kill somebody else that's a peer, like go kill Doctor Strange or whatever, like there would be something like that. But no, he just wants to kill all of these superhumans and get rid of them all. Like that's really smart.
And it's also kind of in a way a nice callback to the Vision's line earlier about how like when they appeared, like bad things started happening at a commensurate rate. And it's like Zemo looks at getting rid of them as the way to fix the world. And it's a really nice, like, I don't know. I actually think the Civil War script is really smart.
Oh, it is really smart. And you actually just reminded me of one of my other, like, absolute favorite small moments, which is the very end of Age of Ultron when Vision talks to the last Ultron.
Oh, it's so good.
I can't really pinpoint what it is in that scene that I like so much. I mean, it all just works together. It's not like there's, like, there's some good lines in there. It's not like any one of those lines I'm just like, that's an amazing line of dialogue. But, like, yeah, like this sort of introspective ending to this boiled over giant actiony movie with, I'd really like that scene. And the other scene in Age of Ultron that I like, and it points to something you were talking about earlier, which is how ridiculous this whole thing is. But I like that, and this is sort of a thing that Whedon tends to be quite good at doing, is like he'll use the weird thing or the thing that doesn't really work to his own advantage by calling it out in a funny way. And when Hawkeye, and part of it's how he delivers it, but when Hawkeye's talking to Scarlet Witch and he's like, there's a million robots out there trying to kill us and the city is flying. And then he stops and he's like, the city is flying.
And I have a bow and arrow.
Like, yeah, it's good. It's good stuff. Like I like all of that a lot.
That movie has like a shocking amount of high highs for a movie that's really kind of objectively not great. Like that whole scene is really great. I like the whole scene where Maria Hill and Steve Rogers are talking after their first mission and they go to the elevator and she's talking about the fact that talking about the twins' powers and everything like that. And she was just like, who would let somebody do that to him? And then he has this line about like, who would let German scientists experiment on them so they could, help their country? And I was like, oh yeah, that is it's good that Captain America has that presence, and you call him the moral center, so that makes sense. But I love that line also at the final scene with Ultron and the Vision, where it's just like Ultron says like, you're painfully naive, and the Vision's like, well,
I was born yesterday.
Exactly. It's like a cheeseball line, but at the same time, like Paul Bettany really kind of nails it.
Yeah.
Well, actually, so I want to throw this out there. Like, we have 3 most quotable movies on here. Weirdly, Age of Ultron is on my list. It has a lot of really like quotable lines. It also has my least favorite line out of any movie. But it has a lot of lines that really work. The other ones I have are Guardians and Thor Ragnarok, which I think are kind of obvious, but obvious for a reason. They're really quotable. Do you have any other ones that you think are quotable?
Well, I agree with you on Guardians and Thor, certainly. I find Iron Man 3 to be pretty darn quotable, mainly because of Trevor.
Yeah.
But I often wind up like telling my kids that I want a sandwich, and then I will continue to talk about something else. And then I will ask them, where's my sandwich? Which is right out of Iron Man 3. I think there, yeah, there are some good lines in Age of Ultron, but I don't think I quote it that much. I quote those other three though, and I wind up like in my heart quoting Captain America like all the time.
Yeah.
So Captain America is the one, and I know we're going to talk about Chris's, but like Captain America is the one character that like he can actually get to me emotionally.
Yeah.
Like he actually gets to the point where I'm like, you've now got me worked up because you're so right.
Mm-hmm.
You're just so right.
Yeah. Well, and there's like the whole part.
There's a moment or two in Black Panther also, but
yeah. But I mean, they're really smart about writing Captain America because they do those callbacks to previous lines, like in Civil War when he says like I could do this all day, like that like really hits me every time I hear that line because it's just they've built that character so well. It's interesting because he doesn't really have like an actual like he doesn't have like a character arc in the same way that like even Tony Stark does. But the reason why is because Steve Rogers is always Steve Rogers, and like he maybe he changes in little bits, but he's always himself, and that's just he's like you said, the moral center.
Right, and like if you go back and you look at my review of Captain America, like my review, like we talked about, like breaks up into categories. One of those categories is characters. So what's interesting is that after Iron Man and Hulk and Thor, where they all have these sort of transformative character arcs, there is not a transformative character arc. He physically transforms,
right,
so that his physical appearance now reflects who he is on the inside. But Captain America is the one character that does not change ever, and that's what makes him awesome.
Right.
But that also is a much more difficult character to write because you have to like, what do you do with that guy? There is no character arc. He's awesome, and you don't want to make him not who he is. Like that's not going to work. But you can get him to the point where he calls things into question, or he has to fight against his friends, which kind of happens in both Winter Soldier and Civil War. Or you test his loyalties, which happens in both of those also. So what they wound up doing with Captain America when he doesn't undergo the arc is they found ways to challenge him more than any other character in the cinematic universe. And when you challenge a character like that hard, it makes that character that much cooler, and that much more right. And speaking of Captain America, so my brother threw this out to me like a couple of years ago after Civil War. He was like, "Is Captain America the best superhero sci-fi fantasy trilogy ever?"
Oh yeah, I think,
and
I
never would have thought about that. And then I'm like, yeah, it might be. I mean, I think there's definitely a case to be made for that. But yeah, he's super interesting. But the one sort of like character trait that Cap has is, well, not the one, but one of the big character traits is that he can do this all day. He will keep getting back up and keep fighting, and he'll do it all day until he's dead. And what's interesting to me is how that aspect of Captain America is the entire crux of Carol Danvers' character in her movie. She is the character that falls down or gets knocked down and keeps getting back up. And that is the recurring theme about her. And so, and then as I was watching Doctor Strange, and he has the exact same character arc and arrogance as Tony Stark.
Yeah.
Like, are they hedging their bets that they're not going to re-sign any of these actors? Slide Doctor Strange relatively into a Stark role, and Carol Danvers is going to become sort of the moral center role. Like you can see that they're used that they like at the very least they like these traits in their heroes. But it's sort of interesting to me when you start to see some of these things repeat in other characters.
But they also repeat in the comics to a degree too, because I mean, like both of them were both Doctor Strange and Tony Stark were rich dudes who like something bad happened to them and then they have to recover, and it leads them to heroism. And both like Captain Marvel and Captain America were characters who had military backgrounds to end up like achieving greatness through powers and were inherently good people. But yeah, no, I know what you're saying. You actually reminded me of one thing that I really love about another small moment I want to say really quick. I love the scene in the mall from the Winter Soldier where Black Widow and Captain America are going to check the thumb drive, and Captain America is so uncomfortable doing all the little spy tricks.
Yes.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's so great. Like that whole scene is just really, really fantastic. Even down to the point where they're like, "Oh yeah, we're looking for honeymoon destinations," and they're like, "Where are you gonna go?" New Jersey.
New Jersey.
I love that part. It's so good.
Yeah.
Let's turbo through the Chris rankings, because this is, I feel like this is one of those things you kind of have to do in one of those in these rankings. To me, it's very obviously Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, Chris Pratt, 1, 2, 3. But in terms of fit of the role, not in terms of like as people. I don't know.
Right.
them.
Well, that's what I was going to say. In terms of fit of the role, Chris Evans, who is one of the actors where I was like, I'm not sure about this. So I really liked him as Human Torch.
Right.
He was about the only thing in those movies that I enjoyed. And I actually met the cast of the first Fantastic Four one time, and he was the only one of that cast, and he wasn't really known at the time, but he was the only person in that cast. And when he entered the room, electricity came with him.
Oh, he just was a star.
Yeah, like he just came, and now, mind you, I'm a fairly substantial Jessica Alba fan.
Yeah.
And Chickless was a big star.
Yeah.
And they had already come in, and it was cool. You know, they got to meet him and everything. But then when Chris Evans came in, it was like, oh, well, that guy's awesome. Like, I don't know who he is, but he's awesome. And so he has that sort of, X factor, or at least that was the impression I got when I met him for like 45 seconds. But I wasn't sure, like, the guy, he's like so smart assy and whatever, good natured, but smart assy. Like, I wasn't sure, like, is this Captain America? And so, I am completely converted, and he is the only character, and I include Robert Downey Jr. in this, where I don't know that I could accept somebody else as Captain America.
Yeah.
For a good long while. I can accept somebody else as Tony Stark. I love Robert Downey Jr. and the character has become Robert Downey Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even in the comics. But I could see somebody else coming in with a very different take on that character and it working because it's so different. But you don't have that option as much with Captain America. Mm-hmm. because he does not change. Like, this is what we were just talking about. Like, you can't do vastly different takes on Cap and have it work. And Evans does such a good job of being the man out of time and the action hero and the espionage and the awkward, like, I haven't kissed a girl in 70. Like, so good. That's another one of my favorite moments is when he kisses Peggy.
Yeah.
Or Sharon. Yeah, Sharon in Civil War and Wilson and the Winter Soldier are in the car, like everything about them being in the car. Can you scoot up? No.
Yeah.
And he shifts over, and then they're looking at him, and he's all embarrassed. Like, everything about that is great. But yeah, so I would definitely say him as Cap, and then I think Hemsworth it plays a really fun and good Thor. I think Hemsworth's comedic timing is really good. Like that. Like, I think that's his best trait as an actor.
Yeah.
That and his handsomeness.
Yeah.
But like with Pratt, as much as I enjoy Star-Lord, I feel like it's Chris Pratt playing Star-Lord.
Right.
Like he's mainly just being what I imagine him to be like in real life.
My least favorite part about the Guardians movies is the fact that the comics became the Guardians movies, and that was never to like what Dan and Andy did, and I love those comics and I love the movies, but I never wanted them to be the same thing, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. That's just me being like a I don't know, big time nerd who's like grumping about stuff. But I mean, like, I don't know. I like the current Guardians book, but at the same time, like, I like Star-Lord more being in the comics. I liked him being like the version that came out of Annihilation and then kind of became like the put upon leader of the Guardians. And like, Chris Pratt was really good as like, I think he's very good as Star-Lord, but it's like you said, it's definitely Chris Pratt playing Star-Lord. Yeah,
I mean, I guess I would agree with just about all of that. it's interesting about the comic becoming the movie. I remember when the first X-Men movie came out.
Oh yeah,
that they tried to do
they did Grant Morrison.
that. Well, when the first X-Men movie came out, Chris Claremont was still writing,
right?
At least some aspect of the X-Men. I can't remember which title it was now, but it was clear somebody somewhere was like, well, when Mystique and the Toad show up, they have to be like the version from the movie. So like they show up and they look like they do in the movie, and Toad all of a sudden has a super long tongue, and he says, like, I remember the line of dialogue is like his tongue is like whipping around. So I don't know how he's supposed to talk, but his tongue's whipping around. He's like, someone once said, I have a wicked tongue, which is a line from the movie. And you're just like, this doesn't work at all. Like, this makes me hate comic books. Or the movie, or both, or all of it. I don't know. But yeah, I don't like. I'm a fan of different takes on different characters. I think it's one of the reasons why I grew up liking superhero comics as much as I did, because for me, like, I don't have this thing where like Spider-Man is this like cemented thing. Like for me, like I love Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man. I love Steve Ditko's Spider-Man. I love Steve McNiven's Spider-Man, like, but they're different, and the costume changes and what they do with the eyes change. Like Humberto Ramos's Spider-Man is awesome, and I love that malleability and different takes on things. So like I don't tend to get locked into, and maybe Captain America would be the one exception to this,
single
because I'm clearly in love with him, but yeah, I mean, I like all those things, and so to have the movie and then have the comic be different, I like that.
Yeah.
I prefer it that way. Yeah, but that's how I'd rank the Chris's. And I remember with Hemsworth, I was just like, who is that? And then somebody was like, oh, it's Kirk's dad from Star Trek 11, and I was like, that guy's Thor. And then like I just didn't see the physicality.
Yeah.
It wasn't like he did a bad job. I actually really like his performance in Star Trek 11.
And he was mostly sitting in that. He was just on a chair, and you're just like, this guy's going to be Thor? What? Yeah, I remember the same thing.
And then I think it was Entertainment Weekly had like the first picks, and there's like, it's like one of it is him like trying to pick up the hammer from the Shield muddy scene.
Yeah.
And his arms like 4 feet around. I'm like, oh, never mind. He's good. like he's clear. He can act. He looks the part, and he's got giant arms. Like, he'll be fine.
That might be the first in a long line of gratuitous arm muscle scenes in the Marvel movies.
The Civil War one is the only one that like really takes me out of the movie.
Like the one where he's like
Chris Evans
bicep curling the helicopter.
Yeah, when he looks at his bicep away from the helicopter, he's not looking up at the helicopter or even the bicep on your way to looking at the helicopter. He's looking at the one behind him and going like, man, that's one hell of a bicep.
I'm not gonna lie. Like if I was in that situation, I don't like, granted, I would want the Winter Soldier to come back to me because this is like my whole character motivation and everything like that. But like, what does success look like to you there, Cap? You're pulling an elevator to a helicopter to your face. This seems like it's not going to turn out well for you.
Right. And now Civil War, I think, is a really smartly made movie, but I did watch it the other day. And in that scene, there's the bicep moment, which takes me out of the movie. But then also the helicopter is taking off and Cap jumps up off the ground and grabs the ski or whatever I don't know what that helicopter is called, and pulls it down to the ground like several times. Like the helicopter cannot take up because he keeps pulling it down. Now, when I learned physics, the way this typically works is he would just get pulled up.
No, he's real strong.
The helicopter.
He's real strong.
Like, that's not the way strength works. I've seen that movie several times before, but I'd never seen that. Also, since we're talking about Civil War again, like, this is my favorite thing potentially that my son Oliver has ever said to me. So we started watching Civil War one night, and my other son Kale was with me, and we got to the airport scene. So Oliver, like, he's young, he's like 6 or maybe he just turned 7 at the time, and he was used to seeing like Thor and Cap and Iron Man all getting along and everything. So we get to the airport scene where they're really about to fight, and so I paused the movie. So we have a thing in my house where like you don't just ask questions, we pause. That way we don't get this endless cycle. Anyway, so I just want to check in. I'm like, Oliver, I just want to make sure before we get in this scene, like, do you understand what's going on? Like, do you understand like basically what I was asking is do you understand that Iron Man and Cap don't get along and why they're fighting and all that sort of stuff? And he was like, yeah, I understand. I'm like, are you sure? He's like, yeah, I understand. Like, and I look over at my other son and he like kind of shakes his head like, well, I'm not so sure he understands. So I turn back around. I was like, can you explain it to me? And Oliver says, and this is the best summary of this movie I will ever hear. He says, yeah, Dad, I understand. Iron Man and his team are on one butt cheek, and Captain America and his team are on another butt cheek, or on the other butt cheek, and the Winter Soldier's in the crack. I have no idea where the whole butt theme came from.
Sure.
Like, that is a beautiful, wonderful, gross allegory for exactly what's going on in that movie.
I mean, it works. It works. It's definitely not how I would put it, but I like it.
Right. And so my son Kale and I just like died laughing, and that has become one of the most quoted things in my sorry, I derailed us.
No, it's okay. And now, a word from our sponsor. Yo, everybody. I'd like to take a minute to talk about our sponsors over at Impact Theory Comics. Impact Theory Comics is a new independent publisher, and they're releasing their first comic, Neon Future. Neon Future is a collaboration with world-famous DJ and producer Steve Aoki, and is written by the Eisner Award-winning writer of Justice, Jim Kruger, with artists Neil Edwards of Fantastic Four fame and Jeremy Rappak delivering the visuals and building the world. Want a first look at the book and Neil and Jeremy's art? Give Impact Theory a follow on Instagram at IT Comics. If you like what you see and you're a fan of science fiction, this might be the comic for you. So head over to your local comic book shop and get Neon Future #1 on your pull list ASAP. And now, back to the show. All right, well, let's do a few quick ones before we wrap up with our favorite movies. I'm going to do a couple more big categories, then we're going to go through some small ones. I do want to talk about like things that you're surprised worked in the movies. We were talking about, over email and how we wanted to talk about the Infinity Stones and everything like that. But I do think that it is kind of amazing how well they've been able to pull off the Infinity Stones and the Infinity Gauntlet stuff in general. The fact that, like, people in my office are, like, talking about the Reality Stone is not something I will ever get used to in my life. Like, I guess that's another one of my four is, like, the shared universe and how everyone picked up on it. Like, those are two things that really kind of stagger me about it. But I mean, that really speaks to, the success that Kevin Feige has had in building all of this. Like, he's made it cohesive enough, and like the filmmakers have made it easy enough to understand that it all works. And it's amazing.
I think the key thing that Marvel did differently than any other studio, and perhaps it's because it was Marvel Studios, is prior to the MCU, the basic approach to making a superhero movie was, I like your little comic book, but I know how to make movies. So I'm going to make a movie that happens to have Blade in it, or whomever, right? And that approach had some successes and it had some failures. What Marvel Studios did was go, okay, so what we at Marvel do well is we do serialized, interconnected storytelling about heroes.
Right.
And they took what works in the comics and applied it to movies instead of saying, I don't need your comic, I make movies. Right? It's a fundamental shift in the way that you approach making these movies, and that is why they have these great cliffhangers in the mid and post-credit scenes, and why the interconnected universe works is because it's in the DNA that they put into the film. It's not tacked on later. And the couple of places where it doesn't work, it's where they take their eye off the ball. Like in Iron Man 2 for me is the biggest example of this, where Iron Man 2 just gets derailed halfway through when it starts becoming your prequel to Avengers.
Right.
It starts setting up all this stuff that has nothing really to do with anything going on in that movie, really. And that's part of where that movie gets a little bit derailed. And it's interesting to me, like, people talk about like, how was this huge success right off the bat? Iron Man was a huge success, first one. A month later, the Hulk came out, and people were like, eh.
Yeah.
Right. And then Iron Man 2, which was financially a huge success, but left a lot of people going like, that was not great. And then you had Thor, Cap, and Avengers, 3 very solid movies in a row. And then it was, I mean, there was no kind of turning back then. But it was not, I mean, I think people kind of look back and just be like, man, they were just a success from day one. They opened with a success, but then you can see them figuring things out and seeing when things don't work and making adjustments. And they have a smart enough team in place that even though Iron Man 2 made a ton of money, that they still recognize that didn't mean make more movies exactly like that. They kind of went back to ground and tried to figure out. Now they've had some issues with sequels, like, you know, Age of Ultron sequel, not an origin story, has a problem. You know, Captain America figured out how to do sequels. You know, Thor stumbled on a bit with the Dark World, and then figured out a different formula for Ragnarok. But you know, Ragnarok works because they just tried so many new things with it.
Yeah,
tonally and all that stuff. So.
One quick thing on the Avengers, just in relation to this. You know, I was talking about how like the shared universe and how everyone picked up on it and everything like that. My dad, generally speaking, this is no slander to my dad. He's not interested in movies, and he's not really interested in like he watches a lot of news. He has a tendency of being somewhat negative. And when we went and saw the Avengers, he was like laughing hysterically through the whole movie, and like that's very rare too. And when we walked out of the movie, he's a very quiet guy too, and we're walking out and he's like, that had to be the best movie I've ever seen. And I was like, oh my God, like it immediately made me like it a lot more. And that's the you know, one of the categories we were going to go over, but I'm just trying to skip just because we've kind of covered a lot of the territory, is most rewatchable. Like the Avengers was like, and also like best theater experience. One of the things that's really amazing about the Avengers was the fact that it was almost a communal experience, because there was so many big moments that hit really well. And the fact that like, it was like an infectious experience. And like, that was, I think, one of the most staggering achievements they had. Just that first Avengers movie. It's like, if that didn't go well, it all crumbles. And
Avengers and Winter Soldier for me were the two big theater experiences.
Yeah. Like they just killed it.
Yeah. And Winter Soldier was just like, I couldn't believe that movie was that good. And both like, you know, in my rankings where I'm looking at things from the storytelling, I gave it a 10 out of 10. But as a fan, just going and watching the movie, it gets a 10 out of 10. Whereas like Avengers, I forget what my ranking was. It was like maybe an 8, I think, out of 10 on the storytelling. But as a fan, it's a 10 out of 10. Like, I absolutely love watching Avengers. And I remember because I'd seen Avengers, I think the third time I saw Avengers in the theater was like still in the first week because I just couldn't believe it existed. And I went and I saw it on IMAX. I had not seen it on IMAX yet. I saw it on IMAX, and it was like seeing that movie for the first time again, even though it was like the third time in a week. Like that whole sequence in the end where the camera just goes from one Avenger to the next and you know, winds up with Thor and Hulk on top of a flying large slug. I was just so in awe of all of that. And then Winter Soldier had that same sort of appeal, not quite as much of that like spectacle. I can't believe I'm seeing this. I just couldn't understand how good that movie was.
Yeah.
And I just was like compelled to go back again and again in the theater. Most of these I have seen in the theater twice. Winter Soldier, Avengers might be the only two that I saw like more than twice. I have a dad now. I don't have time to go to the movies as much as I used to. But and I think Guardians of the Galaxy, I think I saw 3 times. I have an interesting thing about Guardians of the Galaxy too, and this is completely anecdotal to me, and I'll tell it quickly, is that so my elder son was 5, and I took him to see Man of Steel because it was a Superman movie. So how could it possibly damage his psyche? And then it did. And he wanted nothing to do with superheroes from that moment on.
Wow.
Didn't want to go see any of the Marvel movies, like actively did not want to. And I convinced him to go see Guardians of the Galaxy because that was the one I had the most like connection to when I was like, I'm gonna take this. So that movie, Guardians of the Galaxy, came out the weekend of my birthday. And like I took Kale to see it. And I realized as I was walking in the movie, like what a huge mistake I was making. That this is what he was doing for me for my birthday. This was his birthday present that I had asked for. It was like, for my birthday, I want you to go see this movie with me. It was this movie that I was like emotionally invested in. And if he disliked it,
Yeah, it'd kill you.
I was going to be devastated.
Right.
And that thought did not occur to me until like we're literally like getting in our seats. And I was like, oh my gosh,
What have I done?
But that wound up being the movie that he loved it, and it turned him around. And since then, now he likes all these
Yeah,
movies.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, the last two things that I was surprised worked kind of are tied together. I never really, this is, a lot of people disagree with me, but I never really felt like Ant-Man worked as a solo character. And I was kind of shocked by how well he did, because, and like the fourth one I have is like how versatile the movies are. Like you have the political thriller, like Winter Soldier, and then you have Ant-Man is a heist movie. That's what it is. Yep. And like they found a context that worked for Ant-Man. And like, granted, I could watch Paul Rudd do damn near anything and it would be charming.
Right.
Like
Thor Ragnarok's a buddy movie.
Yeah, exactly. Like they tap into all these different things. And I mean, that's like, Ant-Man maybe doesn't work as a straight superhero movie, but they find the right context to make these characters work. And like these situations work. And I think that's one of the most smart things about it, is like they're not just trying to do a one size fits all thing. Sure, there are archetypes and sure that there are structure things, but at the same time, like they're finding the right fit for these different stories. And I think that's really amazing.
I think I was really surprised Thor worked. I expected Thor, and not that I expected it to not work at all. I just expected it to not work nearly as well as it did. I was really trepidatious about Guardians of the Galaxy. I was like, man, we're going like full on into outer space nonsense with a talking tree and a raccoon. And like, I just don't know that audiences are going to buy into this.
I feel like that was the ultimate Marvel heat check.
Right. Like, I mean, I knew I was going to buy into it or thought that was likely. I also, and this one's kind of random, of all the stuff with the Infinity Stones, making the Time Stone work shocked me. But I think the third act of Doctor Strange is one of the best third acts of any of these, because it's so interesting what he's doing with the Time Stone, when they're fighting while time is going backwards. Is super cool and interesting. And you're like, this is like mind-bendingly cool. And then what he does with Dormammu is fantastic.
Yeah.
Like, I love it.
Hilariously, my wife was watching Doctor Strange when I got home last night, and she loves Doctor Strange a lot. And when we were watching it, as I was actually typing up answers to these questions, we had a very long conversation about exactly how the Time Stone works and about like, localization of like the Time Stone powers and everything like that. It got real nerdy in my house, Andy. It got real nerdy.
Well, I was having, because I just watched it for looking at it from storytelling elements, and one of the things I'm looking at is like, do the laws work? Like, right. Do the rules work? And they go to some pretty interesting lengths to make the stuff that doesn't work for the sake of the movie. Like when time is going backwards, but then they are fighting going forwards, like all of those characters get some sort of time stone mojo that like breaks them free from the backwards flow of time. And, it becomes this really weird thing, but it all more or less works.
Yeah, it does.
And I was reminded, this reminded me that talking about villains, and I hear a lot of people complain about this, but I love the Destroyer in Thor.
Oh, he's great. I mean, it's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, he's phenomenal.
He's called the Destroyer. What do you want out of him? He shoots fire out of his face. That's what he does.
Right. He shoots fire out of his face. So good. Gosh.
All right. Well, let's lightning round a bunch of, like, these aren't even rankings. These are just single question things, and then jump into the final our favorites. Okay. Most prestigious actor or actress in a bit role. Do you have a pick for that?
I guess Robert Redford doesn't count. I mean, I feel like I have stole the virtues of Robert Redford already, but I would, and it's not really bit either, but I love Ben Kingsley.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah. Mine is Matt Damon as an actor playing Loki in Thor Ragnarok.
Oh, yeah, that's good. I totally forgot about that.
That whole play scene is like incredible. I mean, like the way that they play it, Anthony Hopkins just luxuriating on this couch And
That's
like,
actually the only time I like Odin.
yeah, he's really great. And of course, it's like Loki playing Odin. It is. I mean, that whole thing is just amazing. And I love that Taika Waititi has like Sam Neill playing Odin in that, just because that's one of his key players.
Yeah.
Okay, you may not have a stance in this, but I had to bring it up. Somebody asked me best hair, and I have a very, very adamant thought on this.
Mine's more of a moment than a style.
Sure.
Does that count?
That counts. Counts. Totally.
All right. When they're in the kiln and Rocket wakes up.
Oh, and his hair is matted against his face.
His hair is matted up against his face. I love that.
That's so good. I have like a very deep cut. There's like the assistant to Nova Prime in Guardians of the Galaxy, and like it's just like this background person who's taking
maybe Hispanic.
What's that?
Woman? Hispanic woman?
Her name is Michaela Hoover. I actually Googled it just to make sure I actually got this person right. Her hair is absolutely incredible. I am just
perfect. I noticed that before.
Every time I watch that movie, I'm just, damn, that is some good hair.
That is a great call. If you're listening, Ms. Hoover, because I don't know if you're married or not, nice hair. Yeah. I think we can all agree. That is some.
It's some really good hair. Best food reference. There's a lot. There's a lot.
I'm never look at that milk the same way again.
That's my least favorite food reference. My favorite is the whole neighborhood sandwich shop scene in Spider-Man Homecoming, where they're talking about like they're in there and he's talking about how it's like I don't know, he's just in the sandwich shop. It's just very food oriented, and he's talking about how he's like, I think he wants extra pickles, and I'm like, yes, extra pickles is always a good call for sandwiches.
Yeah, I think my favorite sandwich reference or food reference is the one I talked about in Iron Man 3 when he meets the kid.
Oh, yeah.
And the kid's like, what do you need? And so he tells him all the stuff he needs, but he starts with a sandwich, and then he gets to the end of the list and is like, where's my sandwich? Like, that's my favorite. I forget what the sandwich is that he wants, but I think that's my favorite.
I have like every single MCU like food scene categorized in my head. I love anytime like the shawarma scene is one of my absolute favorite scenes in all of them. Like in terms of stingers, I just love that they sit there and eat there. And I'm like, you guys got them to come back and do reshoots just to have them sit in like a weird shawarma restaurant. It's incredible. Best display of like a bro friendship.
When Winter Soldier and Falcon get webbed up in Civil War. And Winter Soldier says, you could have done that at any time. Why didn't you? And Falcon just goes, I hate you. That's probably it. They're maybe my favorite duo. I love me some Thor and Hulk and Ragnarok, but in terms of duo, they're pretty great.
I don't know why they work so well together, because they have no screen time, but instantaneously it's like Sebastian Stan and Anthony Mackie like are on the complete same page.
Right. I do talk about this a little bit in my review of Winter Soldier. And one of the reasons that they work so well, and this doesn't get to the heart of why they're so funny together, but it has to do with that they have identical relationships with Captain America.
Yeah, it's competition.
And totally opposite relationships with Captain America. Like Wilson's current partner, and he's sort of, there's little hints of it, like just in the way they play some of the scenes, that he is sort of jealous and wonders if Cap would have the same loyalty for him that he's showing for Bucky.
Right.
But he's willing to go along with it because he has loyalty to Cap. Like there's all of this stuff going on underneath the surface. And then when they are kind of playful together, all that stuff is still there. And I think that's a lot of what makes it, a lot of it, the bulk of it is the delivery, obviously, but I think that's a part of it, I think.
Yeah. I love that they're going to do one of the Disney Plus streaming shows about those two. Like I'm very into that. I'll be interested to see how it works. But my pick for best display of bro friendship is Thor and Hulk when they do the fist bump in Thor Ragnarok, and like Banner does like the open hand and Thor does the dap. And it's like they're totally not on the same page, but they are on the same page. That whole scene in general, like the witty repartee between those two and like Valkyrie, and then Loki is just in the corner chained up, is just like one of the most perfect scenes in the entire thing. I love that Valkyrie wants cup holders because she's like, we're gonna die, so drinks. Right. It's so good. And also the fact that they recount the story of Loki turning into a snake. Like that whole part, man, Chris Hemsworth is so funny. I'm glad that they finally realized he's like a very comic actor.
My this happened in my house recently as I was rewatching Dark World, I think it was on, and my son comes in and goes, "Hey, it's Kevin." Kevin
Ghostbusters.
is Ghostbusters is his role, and they love him.
He's amazing
in that movie. He's the best part of that movie.
I love the part when he rubs his eyes through his glasses. Yes. There's no lenses in there.
Oh, he's so good. But yeah, it's just, and just the idea that they just think he's so funny as Kevin that they're just like, hey, look, it's Kevin. Yeah. What else we got?
All right. Well, let's just close with our five favorite MCU movies because we could keep going on forever. I feel like this is probably pretty obvious after doing all this, but I figured we'd close there no less. You do your five.
My five favorites. Like this is just Andy goes in and just wants to sit down for 12 hours.
The ones you enjoy the most.
All right. Well, my top three are for sure Avengers, Guardians, and Winter Soldier.
Mm-hmm. Same here, actually.
And then I think I'd put Thor and Iron Man 3 or Black Panther. I'm not sure which of they're so different. I don't know which I'd choose. Part of it though is like sometimes Civil War is work to watch. Like I get tired. It's really good. Like I get tired. It's a little more intense than maybe I want as a fan sometimes. I mean, I love that's one of the things I love about it, but like that's why I don't go back to that one and watch it like, every other week the way I do with the rest of them. But yeah, Black Panther or Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 is just like it's so funny. I just love it. But yeah, what's your list? I think you're gonna have Ragnarok on there, and I didn't put that one on there. But go ahead.
I have Winter Soldier, Guardians, the Avengers, Ragnarok. The funny thing is Ragnarok. Like I really love it, but it like the fourth and fifth spots for me are pretty squishy. It's like they're depending on the moment and depending on my mood, it could be a different thing. How I feel. Yeah. I mean, I'm also really weird. Like, two of the most rewatchable movies for me are Zodiac and The Social Network, which are not exactly charmers of movies.
But it shows you've got good taste in directors.
Yeah, I mean, David Fincher is amazing. Imagine him doing an MCU movie. He'd probably light himself on fire before doing that, though.
Probably.
But no, Ragnarok is probably... I mean, Ragnarok, there's like an overlap between the music working for me and those movies being quotable for them being like amongst my favorites, so like that gets elevated. And then the last one is Black Panther. I love Black Panther. It is definitely more on the serious side relative to the rest. There's obviously funny parts and there's a lot of charm to it, but it's you could probably make an argument that it might be the best Marvel movie in terms of actual... I have Winter Soldier still my number one, but it's right up there in terms of the quality being made. And the thing that I really love about it is the fact that it's like the one Marvel movie that really feels like they unleashed the director to like do his thing, because like they have like Ludwig Göransson like doing the score, and they have, oh god, I completely forgot the name of the woman who did the costume design, who's just absolutely incredible. Like everything about it just kind of feels like it's its own thing, but it really, really works. So yeah, that's my fifth one, but there's
one of my issues is I like once I hit 2 hours.
Oh yeah, sure.
My energy just starts to fade, and I feel like the end action sequences in Black Panther are a little. That's my least. I am least interested in that movie during the action sequences in the end. There's cool stuff going on, but they go on a little too long for me.
Yeah. Besides the Korea fight, like the fights are not my favorite part of that movie. Like I just really love the characters and all the interactions between them. Granted, a big part of the reason why I love the part in, I think it's Busan, or is it Seoul? One of the two. One of the big things that I love about that is the fact that Claw is in there, and he's like talking about, it's like, do you want my SoundCloud download? And I'm just like, oh my god, you're so ridiculous. Or SoundCloud link. I'm like, I love Andy Serkis in that. But yeah, I mean, it like I said, it is pretty squishy. But I ultimately, as you're going through your reviews, are you pretty like? Do you find that more often than not they work?
The Marvel movies?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I will say this though, and I remember this moment when I saw Civil War in the theater. I came out and I recognized fully that this was a very good, well done superhero movie, and 10-year-old Andy would have like climbed a mountain to have seen a movie like that, right? Mm-hmm. But that Civil War was the one where I came out and I was like, huh, I apparently have seen a lot of these because I am not as like amped up,
right,
coming out of this movie as everything in my brain tells me I should be. And that was the point where I kind of hit, or maybe it was Ant-Man before that, but that was the point where I kind of hit this sort of plateau that I would be surprised if I have, that I achieve that Avengers or Winter Soldier or even Guardians level of fan excitement again in a Marvel movie, simply by virtue that they did do such a great job.
Yeah. That
I have seen all the things I never thought I would see. I have pretty much already seen, which is not, and again, that doesn't take away from any of the movies that came after. They're all very entertaining. There's not a single one. What are there? 23,
21 based off my count, but yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah. And we hardly even mentioned Captain Marvel, which is, currently out in theaters. And there's really not a one of them where I'm like, I don't ever want to see that again.
Yeah.
I am totally fine if I never see Iron Man 2 or Thor the Dark World ever again. Okay, that's cool. But like, I'm not actively avoiding that. And I can't think of any like franchise that has, probably beyond 3 movies where I feel that way. Like I think the Mission Impossible movies are all like really interesting, but like I hate Mission Impossible 2. Like I never want to see this movie again. Right? There's always the one, right? Like I love Star Wars, but man, if I could blot out the hours I spent watching Attack of the Clones, I would do it.
That's one that's like 2 hours, but it feels like 80. It just goes forever.
That was the one that broke me.
I do want to, one movie that I think is particularly interesting, and it's just because it's like such a different feel in terms of how you leave these movies. Infinity War was an interesting theater movie because people walked out like zombies afterwards. It was like they were genuinely shell shocked. Like people had PTSD from like the snap, and I find that to be like, it's not the same thing. Like people weren't walking out hyped by it, but it made it really an interesting experience because Marvel delivered, similar to like the political thriller or the buddy comedy or the heist movie and stuff like that. They delivered a different experience. And I think there's value in that too.
And that's the only one where they flip the villain equation that we were talking about earlier, where Marvel made this conscious effort to be all about the heroes and not about the villains. Right. That movie is a Thanos movie.
Yeah, totally.
With Avengers as the title. But so that's the one where they flipped it, and they needed to do something different, right? It couldn't just be Avengers, but bigger.
Right.
And so Infinity War is we really hardly talked about it at all, but it is such an amazing piece of work, writing, directing, logistically, acting, with that many characters, that many, I'm sure, egos, that many people that have their own trailers. like, you know what I mean? Like just the idea that movie is cohesive at all, when probably, any one of those, major stars at this point, like could have derailed it just by being a jerk.
Right.
Like there's so many things that could have, and probably likely should have, derailed that movie from being as good as it is, and as tight, and it's 2.5 hours or whatever, but it's long, but it's great. I was really worried about my kids actually going to see that one. I was like, well, they've not read the Infinity Gauntlet, like they're not going to know it.
Yeah,
like when Spider-Man disintegrates, like that's pretty brutal,
right?
And we didn't talk about Tom we didn't talk about Tom Holland at all, but he's amazing as Spider-Man. No pun intended. But like, yeah, I was worried about my kids. So, and like the same way that I was worried when I took them to see Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
And I came out, and I remember because their reactions to Rogue One and to Infinity War were very different.
Really?
When we came out of Rogue One, I was like, "So, what'd you think?" And they were like, "That was awesome." Like, okay. What'd you think of the ending? They were like, "Ah, it was great. It was my favorite part. Love the big battle." And I'm like, "Was there anything that bothered you at all?" Like. And I started worrying that my kids were sociopaths and like didn't care about human life. And it wasn't that, but like we talk a lot about story in my house. And so my son was like, "Oh, like, I mean, I didn't like that they died, but like I knew it wasn't real.
Right.
So like it doesn't affect me, and I'm like, wow, for a 10-year-old, that's remarkably articulate. And then, but with Infinity War, I wasn't sure and like how that was going to go over. Like they seemed pretty dead. Mm-hmm. And I knew if at this point they'd built up over a number of movies, it wasn't like they just met these guys in this movie and then the movie was over and they were gone the way it was in Rogue One. Like they'd been living with these guys for a while. And I come out and my son's like, "Yeah, they'll be back." And I was like, well, all right.
They got it figured.
Entirely convinced you're not a sociopath, but you're also right. And then when we saw the trailer for Spider-Man,
Far From Home,
he was like, "I knew he'd be back."
Yeah.
But there's and then he's just like excited to see that because he's always wanted to see a character with water powers because they're weird.
Even though it's like Mysterio doing like Mysterio things, I actually really love the fact that they have Mysterio as the villain. It's going to be amazing. And also I like Jake Gyllenhaal, so it works out really well for me.
I love that with Spider-Man and like that they're just like, well, we're not going to use the classic villains because they've been used. Like audiences know them, so we'll just pull these. Like I love that they do that.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's really smart. Like Amazing Spider-Man was sort of doomed from the start when it was a retread of a movie that had only come out 10 years earlier. And I recognize there's a whole nother generation of moviegoers that are young, like 5-year-olds that did not even exist when that Tobey Maguire, like I get the rationale for doing it that way, but yeah, I think those, I think it's smart. Just like, okay, well, we're just not going to go back and do that stuff that people have seen already.
Yeah.
It's kind of the way I feel about like I watched the trailer for the Joker movie last week, and I was like, that looks really good, except that I've seen like 8 Jokers in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
Like now, like Jack Nicholson was great, Heath Ledger was amazing, and I didn't really care for the Suicide Squad one, but like I feel like even though 2 of those 3 are great, like do I need to see the Joker again right away?
Right.
It hasn't been that long. And so while that movie looks really interesting and very different, I will go see it, but yeah, it's just sort of that. And Marvel does a nice job of avoiding that type of thing. Like Vulture, I thought was great.
He really was.
Interesting the Vulture's ever been to me, by far.
I will say that one of and this is the last thing I'm going to say before we got to go, but one of the surprises narratively was that I was kind of picking up on it a little bit, but the fact that he was the dad of Peter's date was a really nice twist. Like that, I mean, like I could tell in the theater that a lot of people were like surprised. I was surprised, but at the same time I kind of felt like something was going to happen. And also I love the fact that, a lot of times you're just like, how do these people not figure out that this is who the character, or that this is Spider-Man? And he like immediately figures it out. And like, not only that, but he also threatens his life. And I'm just like, God, Michael Keaton is really good as the Vulture. Yeah,
he is great. And that's a really, there's a lot of things about Homecoming I think are really super smart. And it's all the stuff like that, the ways that it just cuts to the chase. And there are a lot of moments like that in Marvel movies where you're like, oh, they're going to drag this out. And then they just don't. They just cut right through it. That was the one, maybe the only decision in Man of Steel that I liked, was that Lois Lane figured out that he was Clark Kent, like
Yeah.
Like in a day.
Yeah.
And like tracked him down to Smallville. And I'm like, oh, now I understand why she has a Pulitzer. Like,
she's actually an investigative detective or reporter.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. And I like that the Marvel movies in general, like they very clearly, and maybe because so much of my storytelling background comes from being in Marvel editorial, but character before plot every time.
Yeah, totally.
So like you can have a nonsensical plot and I don't mind if you've done the work to make me invested in those characters. Then the nonsensical plot doesn't matter. The only time people really, really complain about the plot is when they're not invested with the characters and then the plot sticks out like this sore thumb.
Yeah.
But like even with Avengers, the plot is nonsensical. It is ridiculous. And in Age of Ultron even, which is not maybe as entertaining or whatever as the first Avengers, like there are rockets under the city and like that's a thing and we take that seriously.
Yeah.
And we take that seriously because we take those characters seriously. Like they make it work. One of the things I tell like my writing students is, the concept, the idea of the movie or the story is it maybe enough to pique my interest. It might get me to buy my movie ticket or to pick up the first issue of the comic. But it is the character that will get me to come back. Like we don't go see Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom because we're hoping to find out what happened next with the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
We go back because we want to spend more time with Indiana Jones.
Exactly.
And because there's the promise of short round. You know what I mean? So it's all, for me, it always comes back to character. And I remember like for years, whether I was studying video production, film production or script writing or whatever, like through all these various stages of my education and my art appreciation and my career, character was always, what people said, but like, I wasn't sure I necessarily always believed it until the last couple of years, and where it just like has really clicked in a new way for me. In fact, there's a lot of people that have told me that like, I'm still pretty sure that they're like saying that because they think it's right. Mm-hmm. Not because they have discovered it like internally and believe it, but now I get it. Like I completely see how everything, like if the characters work, everything else, we make it work. Like we forgive it if it doesn't work and we just make it work in our heads.
Yeah.
And that's really the key ingredient to the Marvel movies. The ones that I'll say I like the least, because I pretty much like them all, are the ones where the characters I don't think work or they're mishandled. And that's been pretty darn rare. Like they're good.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Andy, I could keep talking about this forever, but that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and talk about the Marvel movies, to rank everything. And I hope you enjoy Endgame.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Comics Experience's Andy Schmidt. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel on social media by liking it on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, following it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Ileana Kingus, Anthony Rubin, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Gus, Andrew Scott, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Johan Brander, Paul Reinwan, Connor Farner, Vita Ayala, JDC and Matt Gagnon, Aditya Bidikard, Tara Ferguson, Dave Sletcher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Greg Lockhart, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Assey, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruda Batista, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Carl McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corgan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening and tune in next week for another episode.